The world did not end in thunder, it ended in silence. When the Roman legions withdrew from Britain around the year 410, no trumpet heralded their departure. The great eagle standards, once blazing with gold and pride, were carried away across the sea, leaving only the ghost of empire behind. Along the walls of Hadrian and the crumbling roads of the provinces, the wind became the new sentinel. The island that had known 4 centuries of Roman law, commerce, and order stood naked before the storms. The baths grew cold, the forums empty. In the villas, fires guttered in silence. The heart of Britannia stopped beating, and in its place came the slow pulse of uncertainty. For generations, Rome had been the spine of this island. Its soldiers guarded the frontiers, its engineers raised cities from swamps, and its governors ruled with iron discipline. Yet Rome herself was dying, choked by her own weight and besieged by the barbarians she once despised. When the emperor Honorius sent his letter to the cities of Britain, telling them to see to their own defense, the words were more like a death sentence than advice. The eagle had flown, and with it fled the illusion of permanence. Britain was now an orphan of empire, a child left to fend for itself among wolves. The silence that followed was not peace, it was dread. Without Roman garrisons, raiders descended like locusts upon the coast. Picts from the north, Scots from Hibernia, and Saxons from across the North Sea burned villages, stole grain, and carried captives into slavery. The native Britons, descendants of Romanized Celts, were unprepared. They had forgotten how to fight as their ancestors once did. They had traded their swords for scrolls, their spears for plows. And now the earth they had tilled became their grave. In the crumbling cities of the south, some Britons tried to keep the illusion alive. Roman villas were patched with mud and hope. Councils still met in shadowed basilicas, and priests still invoked Latin prayers. But the roads cracked, trade routes vanished, and the coins of the emperor became worthless metal. Civilization, like a candle in a cave, flickered but could not endure the wind. The island was breaking apart, not only in politics, but in spirit. Pagan shrines reawakened, tribal loyalties returned, and forgotten gods crept from the forests once more. The countryside told the truth before the cities did. Fields once filled with wheat now lay fallow. Villas were plundered for stone. Sheep grazed where mosaics once glittered. The people spoke again in the tongues of their ancestors, Britannic, not Latin. Even the names of places changed, shedding their Roman skins. It was as if the island itself was erasing the memory of Rome, reclaiming its ancient self beneath the moss and rain. This was not merely the end of an empire, it was the end of a dream. Yet amid the decay, whispers of prophecy spread. Old druids spoke of a time when foreign kings would rise from the sea, when fire would fall from heaven, and when the blood of the eagle would be avenged by the wolf. The peasants muttered that the gods of old Britain were returning, awakened by Rome's death. Across the misty rivers of Kent and the fens of East Anglia, strange sails had begun to appear, the longships of the Northmen. To the frightened villagers, they seemed not men but omens. The Britons turned inward, desperate for leadership. From the west, warlords arose, petty kings who ruled from ruined forts and hilltops. Among them was a man whose name would echo in both legend and infamy, Vortigern. He claimed to be the protector of Britain, the one who would restore the island's glory. But his crown was forged not from unity, only from fear. Vortigern's power rested on fragile alliances, and his enemies were as numerous as his doubts. The wolves were already at the door, and the gatekeeper's hands trembled. To understand Vortigern's world is to glimpse a realm built upon the bones of another. The Roman cities were not abandoned all at once. They decayed like the carcass of a fallen beast, piece by piece. The aqueducts ran dry, the baths filled with dust, and the amphitheaters stood as hollow shells where only crows performed. Outlaws roamed the countryside. Pirates raided the Thames. Famine struck where granaries once overflowed. And yet, in this twilight, a strange new energy began to stir, the same wild force that would later forge kingdoms from chaos. The chronicles of later monks would call it the time of woe. Yet out of this misery came the seeds of rebirth. Without Rome's shadow, Britain's destiny would be written anew, not by senators or legions, but by chieftains and wanderers. The soil of ruin was fertile for legends. It was here, in this age of desolation, that stories of dragons, saints, and warrior kings began to take root. History itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter to be written in blood. And from across the sea, beyond the mists of the north, that next chapter was already sailing toward them. The people of the north, the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes, had long watched the island with hungry eyes. Their own lands, cold and hard, could not sustain their growing tribes. They were men of the sea, bold, ruthless, bound by ancient gods and the code of the spear. To them, Britain was not a distant world, it was a promise, whispered by the waves. Legends say that before they came as conquerors, they came as mercenaries, invited by the very people they would later destroy. The Britons, desperate to repel the Picts, would send envoys across the North Sea, offering gold and land to the strongest warlords who could defend them. It was a fatal bargain, for once the wolves taste blood, they do not stop. Among those who answered that call were two brothers, destined to carve their names into the very birth of England, Hengist and Horsa. But before their sails touched British shores, the omens multiplied. Comets burned across the night. A red mist rose over the marshlands. The monks wrote that the earth itself groaned, for it felt the tread of new masters. The gods of Rome had fallen silent, but the gods of the north were waking Odin, Thunor, and Woden, whispering to their chosen sons across the storm. In the royal hall of Vortigern, the debate raged. His counselors warned against hiring strangers, but others argued there was no choice. The Picts were relentless, the Western rebels unbowed. Britain was bleeding, and her army was a shadow. So the king raised his cup and swore that if the Sea Kings would fight for him, he would reward them with land, gold, and glory. A messenger was sent eastward, his ship vanishing into the gray horizon. None yet knew that this decision would alter the course of history forever. The chronicles of Gildas and Bede would later describe this moment with bitter irony, calling it the invitation of ruin. For, in seeking help, Vortigern summoned the very doom he feared. The brothers Hengist and Horsa would arrive not as servants, but as founders. From their ships would descend a new people, fierce, pagan, and relentless, who would give this island a new name and a new soul. But in this first moment, they were only rumors on the wind, shadows on the sea. The winter that followed was cruel. Snow blanketed the roads, and the forests grew silent except for the cries of wolves. In the ruins of Roman villas, peasants huddled by dying fires, speaking of salvation that would come from across the water. The sea, which had brought them raiders for generations, would now bring their protectors, or so they hoped. But the sea knows no loyalty. It delivers both savior and destroyer alike. By spring, the horizon changed. Traders from the eastern coast reported sightings of longships, sleek, curved, their prows carved into dragons' heads. They rode the waves like beasts hunting prey. The Saxons had come, their banners bore runes unknown to Roman eyes, and their war cries echoed the thunder of their gods. As they made landfall, the people of Britain watched from the cliffs, torn between relief and dread. They could not yet know that this moment marked the birth of a new age. Thus began the turning of the tide, the end of one world, and the birth of another. When the eagles departed, they left behind not peace, but prophecy. From the ruins of Rome, new powers would rise, forged in war, tested by blood, guided by fate. The stage was set, and from the gray mists of the North Sea, the first sails of destiny unfurled, carrying the brothers who would change Britain forever. The sun no longer rose with warmth over Britain. It crept through veils of mist and smoke, weak and uncertain, as if ashamed to look upon the ruin below. Once, this island had been the jewel of Rome's western provinces, its fields rich, its villas glittering with mosaics, its ports alive with traders from Gaul and Iberia. Now, the world had shrunk. Villages clung to the edges of survival, surrounded by forests that seemed to creep closer each year. Roads that once rang with the tramp of legions were haunted by silence and by things less human. Everywhere, the signs of abandonment grew. In Londinium, the great bridge across the Thames had fallen into the river. The basilicas were homes for birds, the marble floors littered with feathers and ash. In Eboracum, York, the cold winds from the north howled through broken towers. The northern wall no longer divided civilization from wilderness. Both sides were wilderness now. The island that once traded silk and wine now bartered in sheep and fear. But the collapse of Rome did not kill ambition, it merely scattered it. From the ruins rose warlords, each claiming descent from ancient tribal lines or Roman governors long dead. They ruled with iron hands and hungry hearts. Among them, Vortigern's star burned brightest, for he was cunning and ruthless in equal measure. He called himself Superbus Tyrannus, the proud ruler, and his men whispered that the gods favored him. Yet in his eyes lived the paranoia of a man who knew how fragile power truly was. The countryside groaned under his wars. Rival kings in Wales and Cornwall defied him. The Picts poured down from the north, and raiders from across the sea struck the coasts of Kent and Sussex. Famine followed war, and plague followed famine. Corpses lined the rivers where trade ships once docked. The monks who would later write of this time said the land itself was cursed, that even the skies wept blood, but there was still glimmers of defiance. In the western hills, chieftains gathered under dragon banners, swearing oaths to restore Britain's lost glory. Some claimed the blood of Roman centurions, others called upon Celtic gods. They built fortresses upon ancient barrows, standing against the night like candles in a storm. And in every hearth, the same tale spread that salvation would come from beyond the sea. It was during one such council, deep in the fortress of Caergorthegirn, that Vortigern made his fateful choice. Surrounded by advisors and priests, he listened as messengers spoke of new attacks on the northern borders. The Picts were moving like smoke through the valleys, unstoppable. "We have no legions," one elder said. "Then we shall make our own," Vortigern replied. "If Britain cannot breed defenders, we will hire them." Thus was the seed planted, a decision born of desperation that would summon both protectors and destroyers. The chronicles tell us that envoys were sent east not to Rome, which was now a ghost, but to the coasts of Germania. Across the stormy sea lived tribes known for their fearlessness, the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes. To them, the sea was not a barrier, but a path. The message carried gold, promises, and perhaps a touch of destiny. It spoke of land to settle, of glory to win, of a people in need of heroes. And across that grey expanse, two brothers listened. Hengist and Horsa, names that in their tongue meant stallion and horse. Born of the blood of Woden, god of battle and wisdom, they were said to have been forged in the northern frost. Where Horsa was fierce and impulsive, Hengist was measured a warrior and a thinker both. Together they led their tribe like the twin stars of an omen. When they heard of Britain's call, they looked to the sea and saw not exile, but empire. Their ships were carved from the forests of the north, their sails stitched from the hides of beasts. Upon their prows, wooden dragons glared toward the horizon. Each man aboard was a warrior. Each woman who stayed behind was a widow waiting to be made. The sea wind howled like a prophecy as their fleet departed the shores of their homeland. Behind them lay the cold fields of Saxony, before them, an island drowning in fear and opportunity. As they sailed, the skies darkened. The storm that chased them was not merely of weather, but of fate. Lightning flashed across the waves, illuminating faces painted with ash and rue. They sang to the gods of war, to Woden for victory, to Thunor for thunder, to Tu for courage. And the gods listened, for in the heart of the storm the ships did not sink, they flew, like ravens across the water. The North Sea had chosen its champions. Meanwhile, in Britain, omens multiplied. Farmers found their fields blackened overnight. A red sun rose over the marshes. The Druids whispered that the age of the Romans was truly over, and that the sons of the wolf were coming. Even the Christian monks felt it, a pressure in the air, a shadow over their prayers. They spoke of the sea as if it were alive, waiting to give birth to monsters. The sea mist rolled in from the east, thick and silent as death. On the cliffs of Kent, fishermen were the first to see them, long black ships gliding through the fog like ghosts. Upon their decks, the figures of men loomed tall, broad, with spears that gleamed like fangs. The wind carried their shouts inland, alien words that struck the ear like thunder. The Saxons had arrived. When word reached Vortigern's court, it came not as fear, but as relief. He had summoned them. After all, these were to be his allies. Messengers rode out to greet the newcomers, bearing gifts and promises. The Saxons, led by the brothers Hengist and Horsa, met them on the beaches near Thanet. The meeting was cautious, for neither side yet knew if this was alliance or ambush. But when the torches were lit, and the king himself arrived, the wolves bowed to the wounded lion. The chronicles tell of that first meeting in words half legend, half truth. The Britons, weary and desperate, gazed upon men who seemed carved from stone, their eyes cold, their beards tangled with salt. Hengist spoke for his people, his voice calm but filled with strength. "We are the sons of Woden," he said. "We seek only land to till, and war to win." Vortigern, ever ambitious, saw in him both danger and opportunity. He extended his hand and history shifted. In that moment, a pact was born. The Saxons would fight against the Picts and Scots. In return, they would receive land in Kent and payment in gold. To seal the agreement, a feast was held upon the shore. Wine flowed, songs rose, and for a brief moment, the island's wounds seemed to close. The torches burned long into the night, and the sea murmured against the sand like a witness to deceit. But the peace was only skin deep. Beneath the laughter, both sides watched the other with the eyes of predators. The Britons saw barbarians, wild and godless. The Saxons saw decadence and weakness. Hengist, wise beyond his years, read Vortigern's court like a book, its pride, its corruption, its hunger for illusion. He knew then that this island could be taken not by storm, but by invitation. The battles that followed were swift and brutal. The Saxons met the Picts in open field, and the northern raiders broke before their fury. Their axes rose and fell like the rhythm of a forge. Their shields locked in perfect rhythm. The Britons looked on in awe as the Sea Kings tore through their enemies. Victory came swiftly, and for the first time in years, the northern borders were secure. Vortigern called it a miracle. Hengist called it the beginning. Word of the victories spread like fire. Across Britain, chieftains whispered the names of Hengist and Horsa. Songs were sung in their honor, some in fear, others in admiration. The brothers became heroes, protectors of Britain, favored guests of the king. But heroes, as history has often shown, are rarely content with gratitude alone. The Saxons built their camps along the shores of Thanet, great wooden halls ringed with palisades, smoke rising into the gray sky. Their ships rested on the beaches like sleeping beasts. They did not leave. They multiplied. For every warrior who stayed, 10 more crossed the sea. The Britons had invited soldiers, they received settlers. The land began to change beneath their boots. In the forests of Kent, the clash of tongues echoed. Brittonic met Old Saxon. Latin prayers met heathen chants. The newcomers brought their gods with them, carved idols of wood and iron, their eyes filled with secrets. Villagers whispered that they saw fires burning on the cliffs at night, sacrifices to powers older than Rome. The Christians prayed louder, but their words could not drown the drums of the north. Horsa, bold and restless, was the first to clash with the local lords. Skirmishes erupted over grazing lands, over stolen cattle, over pride. Yet each time, the Saxons emerged stronger. Their discipline in war was matched only by their hunger for more. Hengist, ever cautious, counseled restraint, but his restraint was not mercy. He was building something greater than conquest. He was building a kingdom. Vortigern, blinded by his victories, welcomed them deeper into his court. He granted Hengist estates and honors, and even allowed him to bring more of his kin from across the sea. The king thought he was securing allies. Hengist knew he was planting roots. The wolves had entered the fold, and the shepherd smiled. It was at this time that Hengist's daughter arrived, Rowena, fair-haired and cunning as her father. She was no mere ornament. She was a weapon. The chronicles say that when she lifted her cup of wine before Vortigern and greeted him in the Saxon tongue, "Was Hal," the king's fate was sealed. Love or enchantment, it matters little which. The line between them often vanishes in legend. Through Rowena, Hengist gained not only favor, but power. Vortigern, entranced, ignored his counselors and bound himself ever tighter to his Saxon allies. His enemies called him a fool. His priests called him damned. But he was already lost, for the wolves had learned the scent of royal blood. What began as an alliance of necessity had become a dance of deception. The Britons feasted with their guests, never seeing that they were feeding their own downfall. Hengist, ever patient, wove his web with precision. He offered loyalty with one hand, while seizing land with the other. The Saxon villages spread inland, not camps now, but settlements, farms, and halls, each one a seat of conquest. Vortigern's court, once proud, grew divided. Some nobles spoke openly of rebellion, of driving the Saxons back to the sea. But the king, ensnared by Rowena's beauty and Hengist's counsel, silenced them. "They are our brothers in arms," he said. "They saved Britain once, they will save it again." Yet the people knew better. Fear was growing in every village, in every chapel. The air itself seemed heavy with betrayal. It was during one of these feasts held to seal another alliance between Britain and Saxon that fate turned its blade. Hengist invited the British lords to dine with him in peace. His messengers bore words of friendship and reconciliation. "Let old quarrels die," they said. "Let us drink as kin." Vortigern agreed, eager to quiet dissent. The banquet was set at Stonehenge, where the old gods still whispered beneath the stones. As the night deepened, the hall rang with laughter and music. Torches flickered against the faces of Britons and Saxons alike. Cups were raised, oaths were sworn. But beneath every oath lay a hidden dagger, for Hengist had given his men a secret signal when he cried the words, "Nemet ur Saxus." "Draw your knives," they would slaughter their hosts. The wolves waited for the moon to climb high. When the moment came, it was swift and merciless. The cry rang out, and the hall exploded in violence. Knives flashed in torchlight. Blood ran across the stone floor. The British lords, unarmed and unready, fell where they sat. Vortigern, stunned, was seized and spared a puppet for the conquerors. The night of long knives had begun. The feast became a massacre, and the island's fate was sealed in crimson. The survivors fled into the night, carrying tales of horror across the land. Villages rose in rebellion, but too late. The Saxons had already taken control of Kent. Vortigern, now a captive king, was forced to grant Hengist lordship over the realm he once ruled. From that blood-stained banquet, the first true Saxon kingdom was born. And thus, beneath the cold stars of Stonehenge, the age of the Britons ended, and the age of the wolves began. Before they were conquerors, they were sons of myth. Hengist and Horsa names carried on the wind of northern fires, names that echoed long before they reached Britain's shores. To the Saxons, they were more than men. They were the blood of gods. Their father, Witgils, claimed descent from Woden, lord of battle, seer of wisdom, father of kings. To be of Woden's line was to be born beneath the shadow of destiny, and destiny seldom shows mercy. The world they came from was a realm of sea and frost. Vast marshlands, black forests, and villages huddled beside gray waters. Life there was a constant negotiation with deathmen, wrestled the earth for grain, fought beasts for survival, and raised children to replace those the gods claimed too soon. It was a world that taught ruthlessness, yet honored courage above all else. In such a land, mercy was not virtue, it was weakness. As boys, Hengist and Horsa grew under the howl of the wind and the roar of the sea. They trained with the spear before they could write their names. They listened to the skalds sing of Odin's ravens and the warriors who feasted in Valhalla. They swore oaths over fire and blood, learning that a man's word was his weapon, sharper than any blade. Their people believed that the gods chose men for great deeds long before they were born. The brothers believed it too. The story tells that one winter night, a storm tore across their homeland, scattering their ships and flooding their villages. Amid the chaos, a priest of Woden read the omens in the lightning. "Two stallions shall ride across the sea," he cried, "bearing both salvation and ruin." Those who heard it whispered that the prophecy spoke of Hengist and Horsa. From that night onward, the brothers carried the mark of destiny like a scar. Horsa was the fire, impulsive, bold, quick to laugh and quicker to strike. He lived for the clash of shields, for the joy of battle. Hengist was the frost, deliberate, calculating, a man who saw the field before the fight began. Together they were balance, storm, and stillness. Even their warriors called them the twin spears of Woden. When they fought side by side, it was said that to their people, Britain was not merely a prize, it was a vision. The priests spoke of a green land beyond the sea, where no frost bit the crops, where herds multiplied, where gods themselves walked unseen. When the call from Vortigern came, the brothers saw not mercenary work, but divine instruction. The sea was Woden's road, and they would follow it to their fate. They landed not as invaders, but as instruments of something greater. And though the Britons called them barbarians, in their hearts burned an order older than Rome, the order of the gods, the code of courage, the duty of kin. It was this spirit that would give birth to something enduring, the seed of a people who would one day call themselves English. The peace forged in feasts was short-lived. Along the eastern coast, word spread of Pictish raids breaking through again. Villages burned, crops vanished, and the cries of slaughter echoed from the north. Vortigern, desperate once more, turned to his allies, the brothers Hengist and Horsa. "Ride with me," he commanded. "Drive them back into the sea." The brothers agreed, though their eyes betrayed a deeper hunger than mere duty. The armies met near the coast, a vast, gray shore, where the wind screamed like a choir of ghosts. The Britons stood in loose formations, trembling yet resolute, while the Saxons formed their shield wall, a living rampart of oak and iron. The Picts, fierce and half-naked, charged with painted faces, their cries piercing the dawn. What followed was less a battle than a storm. The clang of steel drowned the sea itself. Horsa fought like the embodiment of thunder. He broke through enemy ranks with reckless courage, his axe cleaving through shield and bone. Hengist directed the field like a chess master, anticipating every move, turning chaos into strategy. The Britons, inspired by the fury of their allies, surged forward. For a moment, it seemed as if all of Britain rose from its knees. By noon, the beach was red with victory. The Picts fled north, their dead scattered among the dunes. Vortigern hailed the brothers as saviors. Bards sang their names. Yet, in the eyes of the Saxons, there was no triumph, only calculation. They had tasted the island's soil, smelled its rain, felt its promise. And in that silence after battle, they knew this was not a place to defend, it was a place to claim. When the fires of celebration were lit that night, Horsa stood at the shore, staring across the dark sea. "We could build something here," he murmured. Hengist's gaze followed his brother's. "We will," he replied. Behind them, the Britons feasted in joy. Before them stretched a kingdom yet unborn. In the years that followed, their presence grew. Every victory brought more ships from the homeland, men, women, and children. The Saxon settlements expanded like veins across the land. Vortigern, blind to the danger, believed himself stronger than ever. But even he could not ignore the growing unease among his lords. The wolves had fought the bear, and now the bear feared the wolves. From that battle onward, the line between ally and enemy blurred. Britain had been saved from one invader, only to invite another. The tides of history do not pause, they only change direction. And now, they were flowing east to west. Years passed, and with them, the illusion of peace. Britain was no longer a Roman province, nor yet a Saxon realm. It was a place of uneasy coexistence, ruled by two masters. Vortigern sat upon a crumbling throne, and Hengist stood beside him, smiling like a man who already owned half the kingdom. Their alliance was a dance of shadows, one desperate for loyalty, the other for dominion. The Saxons had grown in number beyond measure. Villages of timber rose along Kent's rivers. Smoke curled above new forges. They traded iron for grain, wood for wine, and slowly, imperceptibly, they became indispensable. The Britons spoke their language, wore their style of arms, even adopted their gods in secret. "They came as guests," wrote one monk bitterly, "and now we eat their bread." But the harmony was fragile. The Britons murmured that Vortigern was bewitched by the daughter of Hengist Rowena, whose beauty and cunning now ruled both men and Hall. The king's counselors warned that the Saxons were multiplying like ivy, strangling the old tree of Britain. Vortigern silenced them not with wisdom, but with fear. He could not bear to lose either his allies or his illusions. Meanwhile, Hengist's ambitions ripened. He began calling himself Ealdorman of Kent, his warriors swearing oaths not to Britain but to him. He trained as men not as mercenaries, but as a people building law, trade, and loyalty among his settlers. What began as service became sovereignty. The Saxon wolf had found its den. It was a delicate game, and Hengist played it perfectly. He sent gifts to Vortigern, led victories in his name, even built churches to appease the priests, yet each act strengthened his own claim. In private, he spoke to his men of a land meant for them, not borrowed, but taken. "Woden gave us this sea," he said. "He will give us this island too." Across Britain, rebellion simmered. Welsh warlords to the west began to unite under dragon banners, rallying against Saxon expansion. Rumors spoke of a new leader rising among them, a young warrior whose deeds would one day fill legend. But for now, the tale belonged still to Hengist and his captive king, the spider and the fly locked in a web of their own making. Love and ruin often share the same seed. For Vortigern, that seed was Rowena. The chronicles say he first saw her during a feast, her hair like sunlight upon steel, her eyes clear as the northern sea. She raised her cup and spoke the words that still echo in legend. "Was Hal signing?" "Be of good health, my king." He drank, and with that drink his fate was sealed. Some say she bewitched him with beauty, others with sorcery. But perhaps the truth was simpler. She saw his weakness. In Rowena's gaze, Vortigern saw not a woman, but an escape from age, from failure, from fear. He took her to wife, defying his nobles, his priests, and even his sons. "She is the daughter of our ally," he said. "To refuse her is to insult honor." But the island groaned beneath that union. Hengist, watching from the shadows, allowed the marriage gladly. It bound the king to him in both blood and shame. Each gift of land he requested as dowry was granted without question. Kent expanded. The Saxons spread. Vortigern believed himself strengthened by alliance, yet each promise was a chain tightening around his neck. The lords of Britain rose in fury. They accused the king of treachery, of forsaking his people for a foreign witch. War seemed inevitable, but Hengist was prepared. He offered peace, a grand feast to reconcile all sides. "Let us eat as brothers," he said. "Let there be no more suspicion between Briton and Saxon." Vortigern, weary of conflict, agreed. The place was chosen, the tables were set, and history marched toward blood. That night, the torches burned brighter than ever before. Saxon and Briton sat side by side, their laughter masking unease. Rowena poured the wine herself, smiling as the hall filled with song. Yet somewhere beyond the walls, hidden among the night's chill, men waited with knives at their belts, listening for a single phrase. When it came, it was like a thunderclap. "Nemetor Saxus, draw your knives." In an instant, the music turned to screams. The feast became slaughter. British nobles fell in pools of wine and blood, their oaths silenced forever. The night of long knives had begun, and Britain's heart was cut from its chest. Vortigern was spared, bound, humiliated, forced to witness the ruin of his own making. Hengist spared him not out of mercy, but mastery. "You are still king," he told him, "but your throne now rests upon my word." The wolves had not devoured the shepherd they had caged him. The feast that was meant to unite Britain instead divided it forever. The blood that ran across the floors of Stonehenge that night soaked deep into the soil, and from it a new kingdom would grow. When dawn came, smoke drifted above the fields. The corpses of Britain's nobility lay scattered among the trampled grass, their jeweled torques glinting faintly beneath the rising Sunday. The ravens had arrived early to claim their feast. They say even the wind was silent that morning. No bird sang, no horns blew. Only the crackle of dying torches filled the air. Hengist stood among the ruin, his face unreadable, part god, part man, part monster of his own making. Behind him, Rowena's pale eyes reflected the flames. The betrayal was not born of madness, but of method. With one stroke, Hengist had crippled Britain's power and silenced its unity. Vortigern was dragged before him, trembling, his crown crooked and bloodstained. "You promised peace," the king rasped. Hengist's answer was cold as the northern tide. "Peace," he said, "belongs to those strong enough to hold it." Then he turned his back, leaving the broken monarch among the dead. That was the final mercy Britain would ever know from him. In the months that followed, war became a plague. Britain fought Saxon, brother fought brother, and the island drowned in fire. Villages vanished, fortresses fell, and the songs of Rome faded into silence. Monks later wrote that the sky turned red for 7 nights, not from sunset, but from burning towns. The chronicles called it the beginning of the Anglo-Invasionists, the invasion of the English. Yet amid this ruin, one thing was certain. The Saxons were no longer guests. They built halls upon the ashes of Britain's nobles. They raised totems to their gods beside the shattered crosses of Rome. And on the ruins of Vortigern's alliance, they founded their destiny. The land itself seemed to yield, as though even the soil had accepted its new masters. But even gods bleed. For every victory, there came vengeance. The Britons rallied beneath a new warlord, a shadowed figure whose name would one day thunder through legend, Ambrosius Aurelianus. He was Roman-born, yet British in soul, and he swore vengeance for every drop of noble blood spilled. Under his banner, the dragon rose again. Ambrosius gathered the scattered tribes, Cornish, Welsh, and northern men alike, and struck back with the fury of the dying. The first true war for Britain's soul had begun, and though Hengist's armies were fierce, for the first time, they faced an enemy who fought not for power, but for remembrance. The land itself seemed to awaken, as if unwilling to surrender its ancient spirit. It was in that crucible of vengeance that Horsa met his fate. The chronicles name the place Ageless Threp, later known as Aylesford, where the rivers of Kent flowed red with the blood of both Briton and Saxon. The two armies clashed beneath a sky of iron clouds, and thunder rolled like drums of the gods. Horsa led the vanguard that day, fearless as ever. His white horse standard, the symbol of the Saxons, gleamed amid the storm of spears. He cut through Ambrosius's men like a living tempest, shouting his brother's name as the blades closed around him. But destiny, once kind, had turned her face away. A single spear, cast from the chaos, struck him beneath the collarbone. He fell not as a man, but as a legend in the making. Hengist saw him collapse and broke formation, driving forward through the slaughter to reach him. He knelt beside his dying brother, whose blood mixed with the rain. "We have come so far," Horsa whispered. "Don't let them take what we've won." Hengist pressed his hand to the wound, but the light was already fading. "They will not," he swore. When the battle ended, neither side could claim victory. The Britons retreated, broken but unbowed. The Saxons buried their dead in the fields, marking the graves with stones and horse skulls offerings to Woden. Over Horsa's tomb, Hengist ordered a mound raised higher than any other. And from that day forth, the white horse became the eternal banner of Kent, a tribute to the fallen twin. Grief reshaped Hengist into something colder. The fire that once burned in him turned to iron resolve. He waged war not for ambition now, but for remembrance. "Britain took my brother," he told his men. "We shall take her name." Every raid, every conquest, every oath that followed carried Horsa's ghost within it. But victory came at a price. Ambrosius regrouped, and the wars dragged on for years. Fortresses rose and fell like tides. Fields were burned, cities lost, faiths shattered. Yet slowly, through blood and time, a balance emerged. The Saxons carved out their realm in Kent, while the Britons withdrew westward, their lands shrinking but their spirit unbroken. In the quiet after battle, Hengist stood upon Horsa's grave and looked toward the western hills. He knew the war would never truly end, it would only change faces. "The gods give," he murmured, "and the gods demand." Behind him, the sea whispered endlessly, carrying the sound of his brother's name across the centuries. Kent years passed, and the ashes of war hardened into foundations. From the chaos of blood and oath, Hengist shaped a kingdom, Kent, the first Saxon realm in Britain. He ruled from the settlement of Canty, where the river Medway curved like a silver serpent. Around him gathered the fragments of tribes who had crossed the sea Jutes, Angles, Saxons bound together not by birth, but by conquest. Hengist governed with a warrior's hand and a strategist's mind. He rebuilt farms, secured trade routes, and raised halls of timber and gold. Though his power was born in blood, his rule brought order. "Let there be law," he declared, "for even wolves must have a den." And in that law, harsh but fair, lay the earliest seeds of English kingship. The Britons, now pushed beyond the Thames, called him a tyrant. The Saxons called him signing king. To his people, he was the first to turn exile into empire. The first to tame the wild island and name it home. Yet Hengist himself knew better than any that every kingdom rests upon the bones of what came before. "Rome fell," he said once, "but its shadow still rules the land." Old age found him not in peace, but reflection. He had won what no man before him had, a lasting foothold upon Britain's soil. Yet as he gazed upon the mists of Kent, he wondered whether he had claimed the land or whether the land had claimed him. The wind that once guided his ships now whispered strange words, half in Saxon, half in Briton. The two tongues, once enemies, were beginning to merge. By the time Hengist's ashes were laid beside Horsa's, the island had already begun to change. Saxon and Briton intermarried, their myths intertwining. The gods of the north met the saints of the west. From that fusion of blood, language, and sorrow, something new began to stir. The birth of Anglo-land, the land of the English. The white horse of Kent galloped on banners for centuries after his death. Kingdoms rose and fell. Yet the tale of Hengist and Horsa endured not as mere conquerors, but as the forefathers of a nation. They had come as sons of Woden, yet left behind a legacy far greater than the gods they worshipped. And so, as the centuries rolled onward, their story became less history than legend retold by monks, sung by bards, carved into stone. For even in defeat, even in betrayal, something eternal had been born from their fire. The land that had bled for them would one day speak their language, carry their names, and remember their deeds. The ravens of Woden no longer circle Britain's skies. The crosses of Christ now crown its hills. But if you stand upon the cliffs of Kent and listen to the wind, you may still hear the echo of the sea, and in it the voices of two brothers calling to each other across time. History is not buried, it only sleeps. From the ashes of Hengist and Horsa rose a people who would shape the destiny of the world. Empires fade. Languages die. Kings crumble to dust, yet their stories endure, whispering through the ages. Because the past is never truly gone, the death of Hengist did not end the storm, it merely changed its shape. From the mists of the west rose a new symbol, blazing red against the grey the Draco, the dragon banner of the Britons. Beneath it rode a warlord who would one day stride from history into legend. Arthur, the son of prophecy. To some, he was the avenger of Ambrosius. To others, the last light of the old world standing against the dawn of the Saxons. Britain had split in two. To the east lay the new realms of the settlers Kent, Sussex, Essex, their halls of timber echoing with the laughter of mead and victory. To the west, the Britons clung to their hills and valleys, dreaming of a time when Rome's eagle still ruled the road. Between them stretched a no-man's land of ruined old villas turned to fortresses, fields reclaimed by forest. Arthur, it was said, rose from this chaos. His men were not Romans nor Saxons, but Britons reborn, bound by oaths, not empire. At Mount Badon, his banners met the Saxons in a battle so fierce that the ground was said to drink more blood than rain. For a single generation, the tide turned. The Saxons were halted. The island, for a moment, breathed again. But history has no patience for miracles. The victory of Badon was not an ending, it was a pause. The Saxons learned, adapted, endured. For every field they lost, two ships arrived with new warriors. They rebuilt faster than they were defeated. The dragon burned bright, but even the brightest flame must fade. To the Saxons, Arthur was not a man, but a warning proof that even destiny could bleed. Around their hearths, the bards sang of how Woden's blood must outlast Rome's ghost. The dragon will sleep, they said, but the wolf will not. And so, generation after generation, the struggle continued. Less war now, more migration, more mingling. The island was not conquered by sword alone, but by time itself. In the monasteries that survived, monks began writing down the tales, the fall of Vortigern, the treachery of Hengist, the heroism of Arthur. Yet, even as they inked the parchment, truth and legend began to weave together. The dragon and the horse became symbols, not armies. And somewhere between them, the soul of England began to form. From Kent, the flame of settlement spread outward to the valleys of Wessex, to the marshes of East Anglia, to the rolling hills of Mercia. Each kingdom carried its own gods, customs, and kings, yet they shared one heartbeat, the will to belong. The Saxons no longer saw themselves as foreigners. They were the island's heirs. The Britons withdrew into their western mountains, their culture surviving in song and shadow. In the taverns of Wales, bards still sang of Arthur and Ambrosius. But in the east, new poets told of Hengist and Horsa, of Woden's gift and the sea's calling. Two worlds, two memories, both true, both destined to merge. Trade returned. Roads were rebuilt. New towns rose upon ancient ruins. Though the Saxons had once despised the Roman ways, they could not ignore their power. They learned to govern, to record, to build, yet all in their own tongue, their own rhythm. Thus, the bones of Rome became the body of England. By the 7th century, the island was a tapestry of small realms, each with its own law and pride. But amid rivalry and war, something greater stirred the sense that they were one people. When the monks of Northumbria began to write of England, they were naming not just a country, but an idea, a union born from exile and memory. The spirit of Hengist lived on not in conquest, but in identity. The descendants of his warriors became farmers, priests, kings. They spoke of honor and home, not plunder. The storm had passed. The soil remained. Out of the ruins of many tribes, a single word emerged: Englishman. Time is the sea that swallows all things, yet some voices never drown. 1,000 years after Hengist's sails vanished over the horizon, the people of England still spoke his name. They told it as history, as myth, as prayer. The monks in Canterbury wrote of him in reverent Latin. The storytellers of Kent whispered his deeds by the hearthfire. In both tongues, he had become immortal. The white horse still ran upon banners and coins, long after men forgot why. It galloped across centuries, through Norman conquest, through plague and empire, a silent reminder of where the island's blood first mingled with the sea. Even in modern fields, where glass towers rise and engines roar, that horse still gallops, unseen beneath the soil. What began as invasion had become inheritance. The Saxons, who once arrived as wanderers, gave Britain not only a language but a soul, a stubborn, storm-forged spirit that would endure through every conquest to come. In their courage and cruelty, their hunger and hope, lay the first beating heart of England. And yet, beneath the myth, something human remains. Two brothers, Horsa the Fire, Hengist the Frost, bound by blood and destiny, carried across the sea by ambition and omen. They did not know they were birthing a nation. They only sought a home. In that longing lies the truth of every empire. All conquest begins with exile. So when the waves crash against the cliffs of Kent, listen. In their rhythm, you can still hear the cadence of their oars. In the gull's cry, the echo of their war horns. In the whisper of the wind, the memory of two brothers who rode the sea and changed the world. History remembers their deeds, but legend remembers their meaning. For every nation is born not from kings or crowns, but from the dreams of the lost, those who dared to cross the unknown. Hengist and Horsa were such dreamers. They did not conquer Britain. They became it. The tides of time will wash away all empires. Yet the stories remain carved, not in stone, but in the hearts of those who remember. For every echo, every ruin, every whisper of an age long past carries the same truth. Because the past is never truly gone, it's waiting to be reborn. The sons of Woden ruled the land, but the old gods were growing silent. In the forests of Kent, the sacred groves stood untended, their altars moss-covered, their fires cold. The world was changing again quietly, patiently. Across the narrow sea, from the ruins of Rome, came men dressed in black robes, carrying not swords but scrolls. Their names were unfamiliar to the Saxons, yet their courage equaled any warriors. They came bearing the cross. In the year 597, a ship anchored off the coast of Kent. Upon it stood Augustine, a Roman monk sent by Pope Gregory, guided not by omens but by faith. His mission was to bring light to what Rome now called the Dark Isles. When he stepped onto the shore, the wind that once carried the war cries of Hengist and Horsa brushed against his robes. The land that had been conquered by the sons of Woden was about to be conquered again by words, not war. Augustine spoke through interpreters, preaching of one God, one truth, one eternal kingdom. The old warriors muttered in disbelief, yet Ethelbert listened. Perhaps it was the quiet conviction in the monk's eyes, or perhaps the memory of his forefathers' restless spirits, men who had chased gods across oceans, that made him pause. "I cannot forsake the laws of my ancestors," the king said, "but I will not forbid your words." And so, upon the ruins of a Roman temple in Canterbury, Augustine built a church. There, for the first time in generations, the island heard the echo of Latin prayer. The language of empire returned, but now in service of heaven, not conquest. Within a decade, Kent was baptized. The old gods did not vanish. In a single night, they faded like stars at dawn. The Saxon priests still whispered to Woden in secret. But the people began to sing hymns in the same fields where they once raised totems. Fire became incense, offering became prayer, and destiny took a new name: salvation. To the monks, it was victory divine. To the old warriors, it was surrender. Yet in truth, it was transformation. The cross did not destroy the spirit of the Saxons, it tempered it. The courage once offered to the gods of war was now given to the God of mercy. And from that union, England began to find its soul. The sea that once brought invasion had now delivered redemption. The age of the sword was fading. The age of the word had begun. By the 8th century, the island was no longer a patchwork of warring tribes, but a mosaic of kingdoms: Kent, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria. Each bore the mark of its founders: the seafarer's pride, the warrior's strength, the farmer's patience. They traded across rivers, built monasteries where warriors once stood, and composed songs that spoke of both battle and belief. The chaos of the past had birthed a strange order. Northumbria became the realm of scholars, men like Bede, who wrote of time itself, and whose quill preserved the deeds of Hengist and Horsa. In Mercia, kings forged alliances through marriage and sword alike, their borders shifting like waves. Wessex, the quiet south, grew in silence, biding its strength for a destiny yet unseen. Though peace flickered, the memory of old wars lingered. Saxon and Briton still viewed one another through the smoke of history. Enemies turned neighbors, bound by the land yet divided by the past. But in the monasteries, young scribes began to write a new story. They spoke of one people under one God, dwelling in one island, Anglo-land. The word itself, England carried within its centuries of struggle. It was not merely a place, but a promise. To call oneself English was to inherit the courage of Hengist and Horsa, the resilience of Ambrosius, the vision of Arthur, and the faith of Augustine. It was a tapestry, woven from conquerors and conquered alike, stitched together by memory. From the ashes of pagan altars rose abbeys. From the ruins of Roman walls rose schools. And from the tombs of forgotten kings rose the stories that would one day fill every English heart with pride and sorrow. The island, once fractured, had begun to speak in a single voice, rough, resonant, and eternal. The world beyond Britain changed too. New invaders stirred on distant shores, Norsemen with eyes like winter, dreaming of plunder. But before their sails could darken the horizon, England would first know the height of its golden peace. For one brief century, the storm rested. The Northmen came, as Hengist once had carried by wind, flame, and hunger. Their ships cut through the mist like black knives, and their horns echoed the same ancient call that had once summoned the Saxons from across the waves. History, it seemed, had circled back upon itself. The children of the sea were returning to their cradle. To the English, they were devils, the Danes, the heathen men. But to the sagas of the north, they were avengers of their kin, seeking the same promise their ancestors had chased: land, honor, and a home beneath the gray sky. The struggle that followed would last 2 centuries, shaping England anew. Villages burned, monasteries fell, and kings rose and perished like seasons. Yet from the chaos emerged a figure of iron, Alfred of Wessex, later called the Great. Where Hengist had conquered with the sword, Alfred fought with mind and mercy. He built schools, codified laws, and rekindled the light of learning. The dream of a united England, long buried beneath blood, began to breathe again. Alfred saw what no warlord before him had seen, that the island's strength lay not in conquest, but in cohesion. He spoke of one law, one language, one destiny. The sea brings our enemies, he said, but it also binds our shores. In his reign, the spirit of Hengist was reborn not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. When Alfred died, his kingdom did not fall. It grew. His descendants carried his vision northward, uniting the fractured realms into one. And though new invaders came, Danes, Normans, empires from beyond the sea, the foundation laid by the sons of Woden endured. From their wild beginning rose the world's first English crown. The sea that had once brought fear now carried fleets of commerce, culture, and empire. But the waves never forgot their first voyagers. Every ship that left England's harbors carried the ghost of that first crossing, the rhythm of oars, the whisper of destiny. The past is never truly gone. It's waiting to be reborn. Time does not erase, it buries. Beneath the cathedrals of Kent, beneath the cobbled streets of Canterbury and Rochester, the bones of the first Saxons still sleep. Archaeologists have unearthed their graves, warriors with broken swords, women with amber beads from distant shores, and children buried beside iron knives. Their world lies silent now, yet every artifact speaks of a people who crossed an ocean and became something greater than they imagined. The names of Hengist and Horsa had by then become whispers in monasteries and chronicles. To some, they were heroes. To others, invaders. But in truth, they were both the creators and destroyers of worlds. Even Bede, writing in the candlelight of Jarrow, spoke of them with reverence and unease. He called them the first of the English, yet warned that they came through betrayal and blood. That paradox, glory and guilt, would haunt England forever. Centuries passed. The land changed faces. Norman, Plantagenet, Tudor. Empires rose from the same soil where the Saxon warbands once camped. Yet beneath every crown and cathedral, the ghost of the past remained. The English language itself, born from Saxon speech and Latin prayer, carried their legacy in every word. When a poet of the Elizabethan age wrote of kings and storms, his tongue was the child of those ancient shores. When a sailor from Devon named Francis Drake set forth to challenge empires, the salt in his veins was the same that once carried Hengist ships. Even in modern times, the English spirit, pragmatic, restless, defiant, carries echoes of the old sea kings. And somewhere in the heart of every Englishman, from the scholar to the soldier, there lingers a spark of that same spirit, the courage to begin anew upon foreign shores, and the burden of the history that follows. That is the inheritance of Hengist and Horsa. Not their wars, but their will. In the modern age, the world that Hengist and Horsa knew has long vanished. Yet their story remains, like an echo across 13 centuries. Historians trace their roots. Artists paint their faces from imagination. And storytellers like us resurrect their footsteps from dust and legend. For in the end, history is not made of dates and deeds alone. It is made of memory. And memory, when spoken, becomes eternal. On the cliffs of Thanet, where the brothers first landed, the sea still roars as it did on that ancient morning. Tourists walk the sands without knowing that beneath their feet lies the cradle of a nation. The same wind that once filled the Saxon sails now carries gulls and distant voices. If one listens long enough, it almost seems to whisper the old names Hengist, Horsa. In Canterbury Cathedral, sunlight falls through stained glass onto Roman stone. Monks once prayed there for the souls of pagans. Now, visitors from across the world come to see where England's faith began. The harmony of Latin and Saxon, of cross and crown, still hums within those walls, a song of reconciliation between conqueror and conquered. The modern English nation, proud, complex, and ever questioning, is the grandchild of that union. Its democracy, its literature, its seaborne ambition all trace faintly back to that first voyage from the continent. The sons of Woden may be gone, but their descendants now rule with pen and parliament, not sword and spear. Yet history is never still. The same island that once welcomed Hengist and Horsa would, in later ages, send forth ships to the corners of the earth to colonize, to trade, to explore. The same courage that once brought two warriors across the Channel would one day drive explorers beyond the Atlantic and into empires of sun and steel. The spirit of the crossing never died. And now, in an age of screens and silence, we tell their story once more, not with fire and fear, but with words and wonder. Their legend reminds us that every civilization begins with a crossing, every identity with a choice. The English story, like all human stories, began when someone looked at the sea and refused to turn back. So when the wind sweeps across the white cliffs, remember the two brothers who came from the mist, Hengist and Horsa, who brought not just war, but the seed of a people who would one day change the world. Their oars carved the first lines of England's song. And as long as the waves still break upon these shores, their story endures. Because the past is never truly gone. It's waiting to be reborn.